What if every experience, every hardship, every obstacle was given to you, not to break you, but to mold you and strengthen you? What if the center of your suffering was actually the key to ultimate health? And what if your own pain was meant to be the catalyst for your greatest purpose? Welcome to Buddha Belly Life, empowering purpose, mind to microbiome.
Welcome to the Buddha Belly Life podcast. This month, we're going to be talking about brain development in children, life stressors, and connections to habits and behaviors later in life. So have you guys ever sat back and wondered if the decisions you make, even relationships you choose, behaviors you gravitate toward, fears, thoughts, habits, beliefs. Have you ever sat back and looked at maybe even especially the obstacles in your life and wondered how your early programming has potentially played into who you are today? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today, you guys, on the podcast. So I'm Coach Britt, and I'm going to be digging into a subject that I absolutely am so passionate about. It's just this topic I never stop learning about. And there's times in my life where I feel like it's just so much stronger and I'm so much more pulled to dig deeper in it. And throughout our own journey, I mean, yeah, I lead a lot and I'm a coach, but I'm also a human. And a lot of us, and you'll see this with a lot of therapists and people in the coaching world, but you'll see it with people in the healing world, in the world of psychology. A lot of us have a story, and it would be really awesome to think that we've just grown out of all of it. We've overcome, we've implemented our own strategies, and then we never have to look back at it. But that's not true. The process is just so ever growing. So we're really going to talk about this. So the roots of behavior. This is the podcast this month, how childhood brain development shapes habits and relationships. Okay. By the end of this episode, we're going to delve into some education and then just some real life stuff, because this matters when it comes to our health. I actually think it's one of the most predominant pieces of the puzzle, and to understand it from an educational perspective of the brain, I'll give you guys, because obviously I'm an educator too, right? I train hundreds of coaches around the world in gut brain wellness. And we've just now launched our new neuroresilience course, which is a nervous system based life coach training. It's really unique and it's incredible. And so we've dug so much deeper into this because we really saw people kind of bottom out. Even though we're getting into gut health from a holistic perspective, you know, it's mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. You'll see where people kind of hit a wall. And there's this huge nervous system function. And that nervous system is just responsive to, yes, ongoing stress now. But it holds a lot. It holds a lot from our past. And the marks that were left on our brain in early life really determined and set us up for how we see the world. And in order to break through a lot of barriers and see more new levels of healing, both emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and physically in our physical health, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people just hit a brick wall until they really delve into this portion, including myself. And so it's one of the main stagers for me, and I think for a lot of my coaches. So we're going to go into kind of some education. I want you guys to understand the basics of childhood brain development from just a science perspective. I can't believe how many people don't know this. I have an aunt. She passed away almost a year ago, and she had a master's in child developmental psychology. And, you know, her passion for how to parent and the strategies to use with children and everything, when I really dug into this, it made so much more sense, her passion for it. Because when you see how impactful, especially those 0 to 7 years are on the brain's development, and like I said, our perceptions of the world, you realize that this is such a critical time. So I want to give you guys some of that education if you don't already have it. And we're going to then we can get into how some early experiences really influence behavior, even things like emotional regulation and habits. This is stuff that we're looking at as grown adults. You know, I can't tell you how many grown adults need to learn emotional regulation and behavior. I mean, shoot, just get on social media and you'll see it too, you know? So So there's a big connection, and I really do think that the path to healing it requires us all eventually to dig into this piece if we really want to get through some of the big barriers and roadblocks of our life. If we don't want to keep walking in circles and struggling with some repetitious things. So we're going to get into some of that. So one thing I want you guys to think about, what is a habit or a behavior that you have today that you think might connect to your childhood experiences? Okay. I just think of something, and honestly, without dredging up too much, if you can think of something that you would love it to not be there, a habit or a behavior or a tendency, even an experience, like let's say a pattern. Maybe it's a relationship experience or, cycle, or maybe it's a habit. Maybe it has to do with food or exercise or, mental health or cleaning your house or something. What's something that just brings a lot of grief, that if it wasn't there, it would impact your life greatly, in a positive direction? I just want you to kind of ruminate on that for just a minute and kind of have that be your thing today. So as we're going through this, you have something you can reference. It's something that means something to you about this. Okay. So when the brain is developing, there's key stages of growth. So brain growth occurs in stages. So it's heavily influenced by the environment and experiences. And I like to emphasize this a lot while still being sensitive, because we deal with so much neurodiversity now. We are seeing patterns of all kinds of brain-related neurodivergence just skyrocket. And the skyrocketing shows that it is not just, it can't be just genetic. It can't be genetic because genes don't move that fast. So there's more pointing to environment. And some of this stuff is going to be really critical to understand. And I want everyone to take this with a grain of salt. Okay. It's not personal. We're here to grow. We're here to learn. We're here to do better than we did yesterday. Okay. That's why, at Buddha Belly Life, we are here to help people heal and grow through learning and through self-compassion. Okay. So there's no judgment in this space, because where there's judgment, there can't be self-compassion. It's pretty hard to come by. So for instance, my oldest son, so he's very high functioning spectrum. I've been in many situations with lots of neurodiversity. I struggled with mental health very early, panic attacks and anxiety as early as age 4. So this stuff is really fascinating to me to dig back and really try and understand some of it. So there's critical periods for brain development. So 0 to 3 years, this is rapid neural connections. So especially in emotional and sensory areas. So those infants, they're very highly impacted by emotions. Okay. And sensory things. So touch, sound, taste, that's why their taste buds are so strong as a baby. That's why they can eat and need to eat very bland food, because their sensory is whew. And these are the things that they're taking in the world. They don't have the logic yet. They're not making sense of things. They're not, distracted from, some of these experiences. They are emotion. That's why they communicate via emotion. They respond to sensory and emotion. The 4 to 7 time period, so 0 to 7 is really, really powerful. But the 4 to 7 is more growth and executive functioning. This is when kids are learning to make decisions, self-control. Hey, mommy said not to touch that plug-in. If you do it again, you're going to send time out. You know what I mean? This is when they're starting to grow that frontal part of their brain, because when we're first born, there's a lot of that, the lower brain, which is more your emotional center. And this is fight or flight response and fear and, things like that, more emotion. The 8 to 25, which is crazy. That's really, really long time, is continued maturation of that prefrontal cortex. Okay. And this is the part that if people struggle with ADHD or even any kind of, brain function and behavior that seems to pattern what would be called ADHD, they're usually struggling with some of that prefrontal cortex action. So that executive functioning, getting in their front brain, can be a little tough, and so there's something called neuroplasticity. So this is the brain's ability to adapt during childhood and beyond. So think of plastic, right? Neuroplasticity. This is when a child or someone early in life comes in contact with stress and trauma, okay, this impacts brain wiring. And this can lead to things like hypervigilance, always waiting for the shoe to drop, trying to be proactive, watching, hypervigilance or emotional dysregulation, mood control, outbursts, behavior problems, okay, things like this. And we see that more in kids that have a higher ACEs score. So ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. But I will say that doing more research, it's not always just traumatic childhood that can lead to some developmental hitches in brain function. What we came to learn was that when a brain is developing, especially early, especially those 0 to 3 or 4, kids and infants, they very much need healthy co-regulation. So that means they need a primary caregiver who helps them healthily co-regulate. So not just who's healthily attached to them and keeps them close and can comfort them, but who can also help them healthily move through emotions. So I think that it's easy, and if this isn't done, we can develop unhealthy coping mechanisms, unhealthy attachment styles, and these things, you guys, play into everything later in life, and you'll see them come out a lot in intimate relationships. And then again, in parenting, right? I had a therapist once that said, you'll get a chance to re-parent yourself when you become a parent. And I'm like, that is so true. Oh my goodness. And you're going to look at the things you're doing with your kids or issues with them and then look at what was done with you. And just, it's quite the upheaval. It's a soul upheaval, I would say. But kids really need that. So I think we've put, like when we talk about ACEs, I think we put so much emphasis on just really dysfunctional trauma, because ACEs is like trauma. Was a child around addiction, neglect, abuse, things like this. And those are, obviously dysfunctional, harmful things. But what we've seen is that and this is where I think we've done a disservice to people in understanding maybe some of their function and for the desire and intention to heal and move forward, where we've done a disservice is that we don't cover the piece that actually there's a lot of really seemingly healthy homes that weren't highly confrontational or tumultuous or toxic, but to where, let's say you have a parent when that child is in extreme need of co-regulation because they don't know how to do it. They're literally learning by their caregiver. And so if you have a parent who is just very busy, maybe they're responsive, but they're the parent who's like just running all the time. And then the child cries and they're like, oh, here you go. And they give them a pacifier, they give them a cookie, and then they leave again. This can kind of wire the brain a certain way, and it's not always for the best. This wires it to go, okay, I need something to soothe me real quick, and this can actually lead to more addictive behaviors, and different kinds of anxiety and stuff like that. Another one is if someone is really disconnected from their emotional states. So if there's a primary caregiver who maybe is just very stoic, maybe doesn't really know how to discuss their own feelings or really identify them, maybe shoves things down, maybe they're a very peaceful, chill person, they are a good caretaker. But if they're kind of out of touch like that with their own emotions, how the heck are they going to walk a child through learning their emotions? They're not going to be able to do that very well. So then you can have an adult that's very confused. They could be very avoidant, avoid talking about feelings, addressing things, or it can go the other way around where they're more emotional because they're just confused. We weren't given the ability to learn how to do this in a healthy way. Now we're having to try and learn how to do it as adults with a rational mind. And in between these two things, what's happening? The environment around us is telling us how to behave or what's acceptable or not. So we're also morphing what we do based on the external world, and instead of growing into our own health, if that makes sense, we're learning just to stuff it down and shut up, because if we cry about it, we're punished. Or these are just some examples. So the role of neuroplasticity is really the brain's ability to adapt during childhood and beyond. And when we've got this stress and this trauma, the brain's not as able to adapt. And where there is stress, there cannot be growth.
Do you have a desire for fulfillment? Does helping people tap into their own health mentally, emotionally, and physically fire you up? Do you believe in the impact of the gut microbiome on overall wellness? You may be an HWCA coach. For more info on our cutting-edge health coach trainings, visit hwcacoach.com.
Okay, so when the brain, especially in those first few years, the brain is undergoing rapid growth. It is making all kinds of synapses. It's putting all these neurons together, and then it's going to prune it because it's going, okay, an infant just took on all of that sensory information and emotional information in an illogical way half the time. So now the brain's going to go through and go, okay, we didn't need this. We didn't need that. We didn't need this. We don't need that. But sometimes we latch on to things that don't serve us. Like, if we learn early on that our world is scary, there's a good chance we're going to struggle with anxiety for a long time. So especially if you're seeing anxiety in children, attachment issues in children, and you'll see it a lot with, my tummy hurts. Maybe they'll tell you they're scared, but then what happens, and this was my story, is I couldn't vocalize. I stopped telling anybody because then they just questioned me because they didn't understand it. So they were needing answers from me that I could not provide because I was just experiencing it. And it would have taken somebody else who knew what to look for in these behaviors and in these things to maybe go, you know what? I think this child might be dealing with anxiety. I think she's dealing with some attachment issues. How can we help her co-regulate? How can we help create safe space for her so that she can go to school without panic attacks, so that she can do this, so that she can do that, and so that it doesn't come into her adult life? But unfortunately there's people don't know this, and that's why I love to educate on it, especially when it comes to kids. So the parts of your brain, okay, you've got the amygdala is the emotion brain. And they've even shown that part of that lower part of the brain, it's not the brain stem, but it's toward the back and it's a little lower. And they've even shown that people that have had a lot of stress and trauma, especially in early life, can have an overdeveloped amygdala. So that shows that their brain learned it had to wire more for survival than someone else's. You might see that in someone's brain who's in more of a war-torn country, an area where, they had to kind of fight, day after day was unknown. Okay. What's interesting to me too, and I think that this is how everything works for our better interest still, there's always beauty that comes from pain, is that amygdala is also responsible for a lot of creativity. Okay. Because it's an emotional center of the brain. So there's a lot of fear, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. But it's also connected to things like creativity and I'd say ambition. All right. And that's where we want to balance out because we have that prefrontal cortex, that front part of the brain. And that's where it's the planning, execution, responsibility, more center of the brain. And so if you see someone with more of that amygdala function and less that prefrontal cortex, they'll probably be somebody who's maybe more emotionally erratic, maybe highly ambitious, even happy-go-lucky, but maybe struggles to lay things out very good or follow through with things, or they kind of seem all over the place. This can be kind of what these are just examples of what we might see. And then the hippocampus is more for memory. So early patterns. So children develop behavioral responses based on repeated experiences. So it's not just one experience that says, okay, this is what it is. There's a lot of consistent things. So nurturing versus neglect. I saw something the other day that even said, because I'm really big about being attuned to my kids. Through all this research and just watching kids, and I was a stepmom for almost as long as I was a biological mother. I've helped parent 7 children. And so just watching all the nuances of these different kids and the things that their different emotions and behaviors and, all that stuff. They said that, I realized how, and then studying all this, I realized how important attunement is. And attunement is, hey, you're really dysregulated, upset, something happens. Okay. Instead of judge what's going on or shut you down or dismiss you, I'm going to take a time out and I'm going to walk you through this process in a calm, rational way. And I'm going to help you co-regulate, or we're going to help figure it out. And it's not just, I'm going to, baby you or helicopter parent. No, not at all. That can be destructive in a whole nother way. But I'm going to walk you through because clearly they don't have the skills to do these things yet. But it did say something I was reading the other day that healthy adults with like healthy attachments, they need at least 50% attunement needs met. So that's not 100%. So what that says is like, yeah, there's times where my kids get a little emotional. I'm like, hey, knock it off, go sit down, or something. And maybe I'm a little more dismissive, and I'm using my intuition to see that, they're just a little tired and whiny and, they're saying it's about this, but really they're peeved that I told them they limited their technology and it was time to get off. And, so now they're emotional about their shoes, but we both know it was about technology, and it's also, I'm using my discernment, but that made me feel better too, that we don't always have to be just so intense with our children all the time because, it's already a full-time job, but to be more mindful of that. And especially when it matters, when they've gone through things, and when they're expressing something happened at school and their feelings were hurt or something, it's not up to us to judge. And this is a rule of thumb for humans and for adults. It's not up to us to judge whether or not another person's experience is valid or should be worthy of should call for their level of reaction. That is not ours to do. It's ours to try and maybe ask to understand, observe, and then contribute what we healthily can. And when it's a kid, they really need us. They're asking for us. They don't just act ideally. They need us to help lead these things. And if we don't even lead them within our own selves, how the heck are we going to lead them with our children or with anybody else? Okay, if we're closed off to this stuff about ourselves, and it's going to be very hard to do that with kids. And we want to give that to our kids. Chances are maybe your kids will be what sparks a lot of introspection within yourself, because we'll give more to them than we will to us. And this becomes very apparent when you start learning these things in life, right? So consistent experiences. So consistent, things that are very negative but repetitious will stick. Things that are very positive but repetitious will stick. Okay. And same with neutral. So that's really what grooves the brain, and the brain creates itself based on these experiences. It makes like these roads that it carves in. Okay. And then those roads, the longer that they're carved in, it's the hard, they're not impossible to get out of. And that's the hope. That's why we're teaching all these things. It just means that's a lot more work. I'm trying to uncarve roads in my brain recently that, some have been there for almost 40 years, and I'm a quick, I want to do the work and I want to get the result. And, it's a process. So the reward system in the brain, it reinforces habits. So whether they're positive or negative, it reinforces it. Hence a panic attack. So if you've ever struggled or known somebody that struggles with a panic attack, let's say it came on when they were walking into a grocery store. Say they've been through a period of exacerbated stress. Maybe their hormones are off. God knows. But it comes on, and sometimes panic attacks won't come on in a situation, like something that seems really scary right now, and then you have a panic attack, but it makes sense because this thing is happening in front of you. Often why they get so scary is because they'll come in the interim where there's like chill, where you're in between the storm, after the storm, and then you're nailed with it. And so let's say someone's walking into a grocery store and they start having a panic attack. So they leave. Okay. And then it was a big experience. It's a very scary experience. And then they go to the store at a different day, and they walk in and they start feeling that same thing. They're scared now of having this happen again. So they turn around and they leave. And when they get back in their car and they go to drive away, it subsides and it calms down. So this is a positive feedback loop, but it's a negative positive feedback loop because it's conditioning the brain that if we can just avoid these situations now, you'll be safe. As opposed to they decide to push through anyway. They say, okay, this is probably just a panic attack. I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to try and breathe and orient myself. And then I'm going to continue. Maybe I'll cut my list a little short today, but I'm going to get through this. Then as they start getting through the checkout line, it starts coming down and subsiding. And then they get in their car and they get that same relief. Only now that relief is going, see, look, you can do it. You don't have to be afraid of this every time. Look, you just got through it. You didn't die. You thought you were going to die, but you didn't. And so that's a positive feedback loop in a supportive way that's going to support us moving forward. So unregulated stress responses lead to impulsive habits, avoidance, or attachment issues. This is where we can just be stuck living in survival, avoiding the situations that are scary, repeating the behaviors, acting the same, speaking the same, getting in the same kind of relationships, lacking boundaries with people, lacking boundaries of ourselves. So for example, how a child's need for safety or love might translate into perfectionism. It might be people pleasing or defiance. So they may learn that they get love or perceive that they get love when they perform. I see this one all the time. The role of mirror neurons in modeling behavior. So children mimic what they observe in caregivers. That's what they say, do what I say, not what I do. Like that doesn't work, right? Because kids are going to pattern what they see, what they experience. It can get in their DNA. And how this impacts our adult life is it impacts our connections to adult relationships. So these early attachment styles come out based on those early years specifically. So whether we have a secure attachment, which is ideal, we all want that. They say at least half people don't have that, or weren't gifted that. And honestly, I was shocked that it was 50%. I was like, are you sure about that? Maybe it's just the crowd I ran with for so long, but I'm pretty sure it's more than 50% of us did not have secure attachments. So secure, obviously there's anxious attachment, an avoidant attachment, shut out, kind of ignore. Anxious is maybe more combative, proactive, hypervigilant, nervous, and then disorganized, which is kind of a mix. And these can predict relational tendencies. Okay, like if we understood the impact of this stuff, we'd understand more about the divorce rates and all these things that go on in our lives, and in our behaviors and in our relationships. So examples of lasting habits. Coping mechanisms, okay? When someone's dealing with what I call a void, or let's say a dysregulation, okay? Because if we haven't been taught healthy co-regulation or emotional co-regulation, etc., then our ability to do this ourselves, we will still do it. You will answer your nervous system. It's just whether or not you're going to answer it in a way that is healthy for your life and gets you where you want to be. And this is where the coping mechanisms come in. This is where we'll see things like overeating, substance use or abuse, procrastination. These often originate in childhood. So positive childhood reinforcement leads to more resilience. So while chronic stress can result in more anxiety or burnout. So some of the strategies to grow and heal, like how do we get past this stuff? How can we start changing? Maybe it's with your children. I guarantee you're going to need to start with yourself, regardless of whether or not you have kids. Okay. It's a thing we all get to do. It's like our second chance at life. Looking at the things that stand our way. Maybe it's an issue with food, overeating, undereating, impulsivity, compulsivity. Maybe it's, obsession, kind of OCD behaviors and stuff. This is where it's unfortunate that we don't get more into these things when people struggle with different, even any kind of addiction. Okay. And it could be addiction to relationships, to tumultuous relationships, to attention. All of these things, you guys, these innately at the root are just a child trying to fill a void that they didn't learn how to fill any other way. They learned how to fill it with attention or maybe sexual gratification. Maybe, by performance. If I can achieve a lot or I can do these things, then I am XYZ, and that's what gets my needs met. And what stinks is that these unhealthy coping mechanisms that we gravitate to out of survival don't last long. And they often leave the void more raw than before they came about. Like take alcohol, for example. Okay. If a coping mechanism for dealing with loss of love, overt stress and things like that is to reach for a drink all the time, then we're just going to keep reinforcing those things. And whatever that gratification is from it is usually only temporary. Even in people, when people use relationships or types of connections like that or attention to fill this void, then it's really unhealthy. It can be really unhealthy because it can cause us to be very codependent, where now our state is dependent on another person, where maybe we don't set boundaries or even choose the relationships that are healthiest for us and right for our life because we're stuck, addicted to the void it's filling. and we're not seeing it as truly, as clearly as we need to for what it is. So these are things. So we can absolutely heal from this stuff. You guys, the process of personal healing and growth is just so immense, but it's so incredible. It's so worth it. And I don't say that from a place like I am on a mountain of healing. Like as soon as I scale one mountain, there's a whole nother one rises up from the ground, and it's taller than, it's like Everest, and for me, there may be some like peaks and valleys and kind of, over the years. And then I swear to you, every X amount of years or something, there'll just be a huge, huge doozy of a mountain that rises up. So right when I think I'm at the peak of the tallest mountain that exists in my life, the ground shakes and another one rises. And I realized just that, you know what? That's life then, because we're not meant to stop until the day we leave this earth. So if we're growing and we're choosing, then rad, like be a part of that process. And where there's things we're not proud of in our life, or where there's things that have caused us pain, and there's behaviors we do not want to repeat, painful situations we've gotten in that we don't want to be in again, or we want the power to discern prior to, getting in so deep. Like this is why we do the work, is really for a better quality of life, for less suffering. And then it just transcends into our kids, because it's really hard to do it in yourself and then ignore it in your kids. It really is. So some strategies for growth. So like for children, we want to build consistent routines for safety and trust. Okay, so this just lets them kind of know what to expect. If we have a just really jumpy life where they never know what's coming or what to expect, it's going to program their brain and their nervous system for hypervigilance. And even things that look a lot like ADHD, or, they may not even be able to sit in a space of chill. They may gravitate toward substances to fill that void, or, constant technology or something just to keep stimulating. They may rely on other people to provide it for them. They may start lacking the ability usually to self-soothe, emotionally regulate, and or lack the ability to kind of take initiative in their own life, entertain themselves, get creative. Okay. Now everybody's different. What works for your family is different, but having consistency in routines for safety and trust, this is kind of a big deal. Hey, I know mom or daddy has to work, a lot or here or there, but I'll call you as soon as I get off, or I'll for sure be home in time to tuck you into bed, and if something came up, then I'll call you and let you guys know. Or, hey, what I like to do with my kids is we have cleaning routines. I do set, responsibilities for them, but they're not over the top. I don't think they're over the top. But I hated the feeling of having to jump, or just like, okay, it's time to clean the house, or we got to go do something, or, I hated that growing up. It was very stressful because I didn't want to do it. So for my kids, we have a cleaning day and they know what it is. It's Fridays. Like that's our deep cleaning day. They know what our daily maintenance is. Like you wash your own dishes, make your bed, pick up after yourself. Those are constants. We don't leave our stuff just laying out everywhere. Those are constants, but once a week, we run all the laundry. We'll have more in the future. It's just with their schedule right now, we can do it about once a week. So on those Fridays, we do our laundry and we clean the house. And every other week we deep clean. So we have a couple extra chores and we all divvy it up. And then on the off weeks, on the other weeks, it's a little more simple. They don't really have much to do on that week. Mom just does. So, but they know that laid out. And then Fridays are our chill days. Like that's usually when we're chilling at home. They don't have school. My kids' school is 4 days a week. And so I'm like, yeah, we get up and, no rush to get up. You get to sleep in and whatnot, eat your breakfast, and then you do your checks. I would say checks before texts, because, then they like to have their fortnight time. It's a big deal. They get on with their friends, and I limit it, but it's like a huge deal for them. So they know that so Fridays are this fun day, but they know what they have to do before that. But they know all week. They know all the time. It's not just sprung on them. You know what I mean? And that's how we get things done. And then they trust me, and they can feel comfortable in their environment. They know the routines kind of for school and what to do in certain situations. So there's consistency. They know mom's home. They know mom can be present. They know stuff like that to create that safety. So encourage emotional expression through play and conversation. So talking to our kids, you guys, we can't be afraid of emotions and putting words to them. And we don't want to just oversimplify it. You're happy or you're sad. It's good or it's bad. Like this is a travesty to our existence, because there's so much nuance of emotion. There's anxiety, different kinds of worry and apprehension, and positive feelings, joy and excitement. Those are different. Believe it or not, they're different. I think joy is more zenful, content. Excitement is stimulating. It's positively stimulating, right? Because that same sensation in the body in a negative context is anxiety or fear. It's like the body will do the same thing, but it perceives it different. So talking about emotional expression, so through play and conversation, and then to teach self-regulation using mindfulness and breathing exercises or things like that. So there's so many things we can do with our kids and with ourselves, but if we can't do it with ourselves, we're not going to be able to do it with our children. Just to note. Okay. So, hey, you know what? Like with my kids. Okay. So when they're really emotional or whatever, I don't just tell them to shut off the emotion. See, I learned, like, after enough life, I was like, this isn't healthy. Now, if they're going to be kicking and screaming, which is normal at certain ages and things, we don't do that out here. I recommend, if you need some help with some of these things, the book, Parenting with Love and Logic, was a godsend for me, especially being a stepmom, because you don't want to jump in and be the evil stepmom. It was a big, I'm not step parenting anymore, but, I have for a majority of my adult life as a parent in general. So for like 12 years of it. And so that was just so great for me, because you don't want to come in and just be the mean guy. But yet you need order and you need to have a level of authority. So how do you do this with love and logic, right? But be effective. And so it was really great for how to handle a lot of different things like that. But we can teach our kids self-regulation, like it's allow them to handle their own emotions, but with us there kind of as a coach, as a comfort system when appropriate in certain ways. And you'll just learn a lot about that. Like I said, that's a great book. But what it comes down to, guys, is us. So for adults, practice inner child work to identify unmet needs and triggers. If you think the inner child work sounds loopy or silly, let me just tell you that I can guarantee you that almost anyone that would dig into actual inner child work would be very challenged. In a good way, but I think it's a really emotional experience, because what you're realizing is a lot of us as adults, and you'll see this relationally. Okay. When you see two people, a couple butting heads and really at a crossroads with things, there's really just two kids fighting for unmet needs with the tools that they still have and the wounds that they carry from very early in life. And this just plays out over and over and over again. So ideally, in a healthy situation, we're doing our own work, and then so is the person on the other end of us, and we can grow together. Okay. If you don't have two participants in this, it's going to be pretty hard, but you will always benefit from doing your own work, no matter what comes in your life or goes in your life. So that inner child work is just kind of, like I said, reparenting yourself, realizing that a lot of our responses are anxiety, even our anger. Okay. You can be a manly dude who's tough and aggressive and you don't cry, blah, blah, whatever. I can pick out 100 behaviors that are a child screaming for something that they didn't get. And they just look like a grown man that's angry and XYZ, but they're coming from that same place. So doing that inner child work is how we get healthy. It's how we look at ourselves with compassion and walk through it. Okay, so rewiring the brain through positive habits, affirmations, and emotional regulation techniques. The more we practice something, one of my favorite things to recommend is just self-awareness and then call a timeout. So if for like conflict situations, this to me, this is so beneficial. And it was so beneficial for my life, because I would be the type of person that tried so hard, learn all the things, implement so hard, try so hard, hold it together, use every ounce of patience I had. And if it wasn't working, if it wasn't influencing the thing on the other enemy or whatever, I would be patient until I was not patient. And then just boom, like snap. And the level of frustration. And I would go from just being so together and adult to just flipping, being so angry, wanting to throw something. I mean, just like the frustration. And so what I learned was that you know what? You can't control anyone on the other end of you. You can't do it. Don't try. Stop trying. Just because you do a ton of personal work doesn't mean it's going to change someone else. It may benefit your relationship a ton or things, but it also may not. But do it anyway, and know when to call a timeout. So you know what? In order to maintain my integrity and who I am as a person, and just the situation in general, I started recognizing before I got to that point where my patience was done. And I would go, okay, you know what? I'm about here. I'm going to take a time out. We need to take a break. I'm going to take a time out. And I would just remove, like when all else fails, just shut up. This does not mean stonewall. I mean, ideally, if we're in a situation, maybe it's our kids, especially if it's our kids, you gotta be really careful not to shut them out and stonewall. But maybe it's our partner, but hey, I'm going to take a break real quick. Like, let's say we need it, even as a parent, I'm about to lose my mind. All y'all are too much. I'm sensory overloaded. It was a long day and I'm about to, I'm about to sell one of my kids, then you know what? Listen, why don't you guys watch a show for a minute? Mommy's going to go take a time out and think about this. And then we're going to handle it when I'm going to go take a time out to calm down and just to get my thoughts so that we can handle this in a way that's healthy for both of us. And if you can articulate that and then do it, whether that's an intimate relationship, whether it's with parents, it is so much better for you. It's going to keep you from doing things you might regret, from saying things you might regret, from damaging the situation more, from escalating things. But then it also will show other people, especially children. Remember, do as I say, not as I do. They'll do what you do. They will do what you do. So if they watch you be upset, take control of yourself, take a time out, gather your thoughts, come back and handle it with compassion and in a healthy way, then they will embody more of that. And then you can talk about it. You can talk about why you did that and how it was good for you to do that. And the next time they're upset, I do that with my kids sometimes. If they're angry and they're kind of just like, I can tell they're a little snotty, like they're not going to hear me. I go, you know what? One of my sons can get in his zone like this. Not very often, but when he's in that zone, I can't break it. Like there's nothing I could say to him that could get him out of that. And so I say, you know what? You look like maybe you just need to take some personal time. Do you need some personal time? And because I've done that before where I've cut him off where he's going to get in trouble. Like he's going to start saying some stuff and he's about to get in trouble. And so I go, you know what? How about it sounds to me like you're real emotional and I don't want you getting yourself in trouble because you're too emotional right now. So I want to give you the chance to maybe just take a time out right now until you feel like ready to talk to me. You want to do that? And he would do that. And then he learned to just start doing it for himself. He would just tell me, Mom, I need to take a time out right now. And I'm not offended by that. If he's in trouble or he's mad at me and I don't agree with it or whatever, but he says he needs time out, we will come back to it. But I honor it. I respect that boundary because he is practicing his own emotional regulation. And I need to teach that to him now at 7, 8, 9, 10, instead of trying to teach that to him, or his wife or someone trying to teach it to him at 35. I mean, or after a lot of damage is done, so that's really big. They will copy us. And then seek supportive relationships that model healthy patterns. We are the company we keep a lot. And if we're around a lot of a community that is really reckless or dysfunctional, it'll be harder to support being the way we want to be. It'll be easier just to fall back default. Okay. And then leverage neuroplasticity with intentional learning and stress management. You guys, they say relationships take work. Parenting is work. I mean, I don't really like the word work. I like the word investment. Anything you care about requires an investment. You do it with your businesses. You do it with, maybe your car. Okay. We've got to do it with our kids. We've got to do it with ourselves. We've got to do it with our relationships. It requires investment. So if it feels like a drag to you or a pain in the ass, well, maybe get your mind right and check your priorities. I know that maybe is a little harsh, but I've seen just too much damage done because people won't prioritize the investment in that. They'll invest in the extracurriculars. They'll invest in the friends. They'll invest in all kinds of stuff. And yet the most important thing to truly invest in is yourself, your own personal growth and development, and your children and the people closest in your family and your life. Because without that, you don't have a foundation. So everything else you built, is more superficial. This is the root of our lives. It is worth investing in, and we got to own it. We got to want it, because if you're doing it because you're trying to please somebody or something, it just isn't the same. We've got to want the growth. We've got to want to step into it, even if when it sucks or it's uncomfortable, because it's worth the investment. So I hope this inspired you guys a little bit today. I hope we have some resources for some of these things. I hope that through doing a lot of this work too, and this might be kind of a controversial thing to say, but I'm always so fascinated with brain and behavior and all kinds of struggle, right? Especially as somebody who's a big advocate of mental health and has struggled with mental health and throughout my life. But it is so fascinating to me to look at the brain. And I think that we've diagnosed so many things. And what's frustrating is that I think it can hold us back. I think diagnoses, I'm doing air quotes right now, are good because they help us understand a set of patterns. Okay. When we're talking about bipolar disorder, ADHD, autism spectrum, anxiety, depression, all these things, they help us identify a set of behavioral patterns, kind of like a mapping of the brain. We can see why they're diagnoses is we can see consistency among brain patterning and behavior in people that are of common, diagnoses or whatever. But what we learn when we dig into the brain is that it all makes sense. It makes sense how the brain will wire. And I think that, I just really empower everyone to just sit with some of that. Think about your life. If it's comfortable, if it's not going to throw you into a state of trauma, and for Pete's sake, definitely get connected to a good therapist. But it's not about dwelling on the past, but sometimes we got to understand how we were wired. And I know that one of the biggest challenges that I've seen, and I've talked to other people about this, is to sometimes acknowledge that our early life years, we didn't have healthy co-regulation, or our needs weren't necessarily met. We didn't have healthy attachment that was able to form, but we have great relationships and great affection for maybe our caregivers, and they weren't toxic or bad people or anything like that. It wasn't the obvious dysfunction. So we can almost have this separation of self-denial where we're not looking at the reality of what we've been through. And to understand where we've been is to understand more of how we function. And by understanding that, then we can choose to do the work and come and put ourselves together differently and evolve. But if we're afraid to go there because we only see it as a negative thing, it's not a negative thing all the time. I mean, I already told my kids, I'm a very intentional parent, and I already told my kids I will pay for a lot of their therapy when they grow up, because I already know they're probably going to need it. And should they ever want it or need it, there's no pride in me. I'm just, that's how they know I support them. That is how they know I'm imperfect and I'm doing my best. And if I need to apologize, I apologize. And because that rubs off on them. I want them to grow up and be adults that know how to apologize. I want them to grow up and be adults that aren't afraid to look at their shadows, that see that as freeing and empowering instead of damaging, threatening, something to be avoided, So I have to be that to them. So by doing these things, you guys, I just really invite you to just sit with some of this stuff. Look at your own life, especially if you're a parent and you're parenting your kids, don't just make it about them. It's going to have to be about you. But really, I mean, this is the first step in really healing, and the impact that this brain shape takes on for the nervous system is incredible. And this is what brought me so into it, because of anxiety and all of these things that people deal with. Okay. Even very compulsive or like ADHD behavior. It's like you've got a very hyper aroused nervous system. And it makes sense, because then sometimes it's not just the stress that's impacting the nervous system and it can't shake out of it. We've got a brain that's wired to keep that nervous system on high alert. And that was the golden nuggets for me. So in order to start wiring this into a state of homeostasis, we've got to dig in. All right. So like anything, that's what we do here. And hopefully you find a safe space. There's so many more podcast episodes you guys can listen to. Check out the closed group. It is the Buddha Belly Life group. You can check it out too. We've got all kinds of stuff coming up here, and we're going to have a monthly app access for a lot of this stuff, nervous system regulation and even gut brain work and everything. So you can subscribe to BuddhaBellyLife.com. Check out any of that. If you're interested in being a coach, definitely you can get there through that too. But yeah, I mean, you're invited to be a part of the process. Just don't do it alone, and do it healthy, and reach out, because we're not stuck. We don't have to be stuck. And where we've been led to believe that our diagnosis or our situations are set in stone, and this is just the hand we were dealt. Yeah, maybe it was the hand we were dealt, but it's not the hand we have to keep. Okay. And that's the point. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this episode. And I hope you love it. And I'll see you again next time.
Thank you for joining us for another empowering episode of Buddha Belly Life. For more information on gut health and mindset resources, visit buddhabellylife.com. And remember, heal yourself and then empower others to do the same.